Hey guys, it's Lorentz from iWood Cosplay, and today I'm going to show you guys how I made Zack's shoulder pad from Final Fantasy VII Remake. So I just finished the game last week, and like many of you guys, the ending caught me off guard. I love it, but without further ado, I'm going to tackle this project right now. The patterns I had made before, but I remodified it so they can accommodate the new designs we see in the remake. So I'm going to start off by taking the pattern that you can get from my Etsy shop. I'll have a link in the description down below. If you already have the old pattern, you can probably use this pattern too, but the new pattern is slightly better in my opinion. Let's take that pattern and put it onto 4mm foam, as you see right here. I'm just going to pin it down and trace it. The key thing here is to make sure not to cut these registration marks. I know they are in the pattern, but they are there solely to act as registration marks, so do not cut them. Okay, so you can make the trim using a thin strip of 2mm and just line the outside of it. But if you want a seamless trim, I'm gonna show you guys how I do that right now. So in the pattern, you'll see the shoulder pad pattern has a line straight down the middle. This is very important to make sure you transfer this pattern onto 4mm foam first. Once you've done that, then go ahead and cut this pattern along this line. So you can trash this top piece. So you also see that along this line there is registration marks. Make sure you cut those out as well. And that's going to line up with the smaller trim part we have in the pattern as well. So once I cut out that piece, I'm going to transfer it onto 2mm foam, not 2mm foam, and hence begins the process of the trim making. So once you have that trim pattern onto the 2mm foam and transferred, you're gonna take the 2mm trim pattern and line it up along the registration marks. This should create a trim margin so that you can create that trim, that seamless trim that you want. If you don't want to do this method, you can definitely do the strip of 2mm foam and then just line up the trim yourself. So once you have that trim made on the 2mm foam, you can go ahead and cut that out just like this. Boom, and there you have it, a seamless trim. Well, at least for one side of the, or section of the shoulder pad. Okay, so once you made the trim pattern, give yourself a pat on the back. I'm gonna skip the whole cutting pattern onto the foam because I trust you guys know how to do that. So I'm gonna start with the laser kit. This has extra details just as this piece right here and the outline with the screw bolts right here. So because I'm using the foam kit, I'm going to have to bevel the edge where the collar sits, and I'm going to do that using a Dremel. And if you're using the pattern, I will have the edge that needs to be beveled in the instructions. Once you've done the bevel edges, we're ready to heat shape the foam. I like to use a styrofoam bowl sitting on top of a, what do you call it, like scaffold. It's like a piece of used duct tape, so it keeps the ball from moving. Okay, and without being too repetitive, I'm basically heating up the foam, allowing that to heat up and shaping around the styrofoam ball. And that's going to help me give that round shape around my shoulder pad. Okay, so we're gonna do that for all the pieces, the 4mm and the 6mm. So what was once flat should look something like this now, which helps us line up the seam edges and create that curve that we want for the shoulder pad. So if you guys have been watching my videos for a while, you guys already know what this is. This is contact cement. This is the brand BARGE. You can definitely use other brands like DAP, and I have a link to both of those in the description down below. But if you're new here, this is the adhesive we use, and it's contact cement. It's great because it's flexible, allows us to put the edges of foam together, and it's great for foam builds. And without further ado, go ahead and apply the contact cement. Make sure you wear your respirator, of course. Once you've applied the contact cement, give it about a minute or two to dry out, tack it to a touch, and then put the two edges together. So just go ahead and take your time with this. This could be a little challenging, but this is where the registration marks I mentioned earlier in the tutorial comes in handy. Okay, so once we put the two pieces together, we have this nice round curved shape. The next thing we need to do is we want to put the collar on, and this is how you do it. So that bevel edge we made earlier is going to come in handy because we want that collar to sit at a certain angle. So we're just going to apply contact cement to that seam edge as well as this region of the collar, put the two together. Oh yes, and you can definitely use a blow dryer, not a heat gun, a blow dryer to speed up the drying process for contact cement. And just like before, once it's dry, tack it to a touch, go ahead and line up the edges, making sure the edges are seamless. And we're gonna start from one corner and basically line up the collar using the bottom edge of the shoulder pad as a guide. So if you're working with a 4mm piece, go ahead and take your time with it, making sure it's nice because that's the final product that everyone's going to see. If you're working with a 6mm, that's going to sit underneath. You can be a little messy and it's more forgiving, but just keep that in mind when you're making these collar pieces. So the only difference between the remake and the original design is that the remake has a undershell, and that's what we're making here. So basically we're making like 4 shoulder pads, we're stacking them together, and it's going to look something like this. So this is very similar to my cloud shoulder pad pattern. I'll have a link right there if you guys want to check that out. But we're going to stack the two pieces together, position it accordingly, and once we're happy with the position, we're going to pin it down and trace the outer shell with a silver Sharpie. So once you're happy with the positioning and you've outlined the outer shell, go ahead and unpin itself and remove the 2 shells and get ready to apply contact cement to both sides. Oh, and here's a good rule of thumb. I'm gonna mark the left and right shoulder pad. In this case, I'm using a marker X so that I don't mess anything up when I'm making the left and right shoulder pad. Okay, so once we have all that, all we need to do now is apply contact cement to both sides of the shoulder pads. You don't have to apply contact cement to the entire area. You can just apply it to the perimeter of the outline. And of course, the trusty blow dryer. This speeds up the process, and I highly, highly, highly recommend this when working with contact cement. Here comes the tricky part. You're gonna try to line up the 2 layers once again, starting with one side, but because it's circular or like it's a cap, you wanna make sure the other side doesn't stick prematurely as you're working with one side. And if that doesn't make sense, just check out the video, you'll see what I mean. All right, so don't go cheap here. Make sure the whole thing is covered. So the whole point of the parchment paper is that it won't stick to the contact cement, and that allows you to work with sections at a time using contact cement. And with the help of the parchment paper, you'll have one side securely positioned, and once you have that, go ahead and do the same thing to the other side. Okay, and watch as I massage this piece of foam to make it look like a shoulder pad. And if you do the massaging correctly, you should have 2 pieces that look like this. Oh, and here's a cool tip. You can definitely round off the edges using a stone bit on a Dremel. So you can definitely use a sanding drum, but that roughs up the edges too much in my opinion, so I'm using the stone bit. That's what I found works best, and that's what I'm using right here. Okay, so we're almost done here. The last thing we need to do is add the trim that we made earlier, and we're gonna do that using the Loctite 200. So Loctite 200 is my favorite spray adhesive. There's a ton of them out there, but I like this Loctite 200 the best, so I'll have a link in the description down below. You guys can check that out. Basically spray it to both sides, and you just stick it together, and you have something that looks like this. So once you have the side trim on, the collar trim is going to be a little long, so go ahead and line up the corners and trim off the excess like so. Once you've done that and apply the Loctite 200, you should have something that looks like this. Okay, so this step is optional, but I like rounding out my edges now. So I'm gonna go ahead and use that stone bit that I talked about earlier and round off my edges. And just like that, we're done with this tutorial. Hopefully that wasn't too bad, but if you guys do have any questions, please, please, please let me know in the comments and I'll answer them as soon as I can. So this is just the foam build. In the next video, I'm gonna show you guys how to take that foam build that we saw in this tutorial and make this finished product, which is the weathering and the painting process. So stay tuned for that one. And if you guys like this tutorial, make sure to hit that like button. If you guys are new here, you guys want to check out my other videos I made, make sure to subscribe right here and my other videos right here. And with that being said, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.